Welcome back from your working group sessions. I hope everybody had a really productive time. I'm going to ask everyone to wrap up their conversations and take a seat because we are going to move into our special topics. We have two special topic presentations for you today. And the first one, I believe, is, do I have this right? Title 24, Part 6 Updates by Fangxing Liu. And so I would like to welcome them to the stage. Thank you so much, everyone.
Do I just advance? All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Fangxing Liu. I'm with Energy and Environmental Economics, or E3. My company has been supporting the development of the building code metrics for the past 20 years, I believe, and I recently managed the 2028 code cycle metric development, which would go in effect in January 1st, 2029, I guess, which sounds like forever in the future. But for today, I'm going to give you all a summary of the metrics, the biggest changes, and also some of the important takeaways that we got from the recent metric, and mainly as a sharing for the building community. All right, so in terms of the roadmap, I will first give a brief introduction of the metric background and definitions. I will breeze through the modeling overview and only focus on the major updates for the 2028 code cycle. And then I will spend the majority of time on the section 3 involving metrics in the changing grid. The point of this section is that the electricity grid will experience a dramatic shift in the next 30 years, and that will be reflected in the building code. And I want to spend a few minutes talking through what that change is and what is the impact. And finally, I will show some results comparison between the 2025 code cycle and the 2028. I've given this presentation in a CEC public workshop. I think we have recordings with more details. We also published a memo describing the detailed methodology. So this is more of a condensed version of both the public workshop and the report, but always happy to answer questions and to share more. All right, start with the background and principles. This hopefully is one kind of review for most of you here, but just to level set, the California Energy Code was established in 1974 for the main purpose to make sure that the building code is cost effective over the building life cycle. And within the building code, there are mainly two metrics. The first is the long-term cost factor, so LSC. This is a metric that is mainly used to measure cost effectiveness, and it represents the long-run forecast of marginal system cost and revenue recovery cost over 30-year horizon. And we can unpack that a little bit in future slides. And the second metric is called the source energy factor. It essentially measures the energy saving for the lifetime of the building code. The source energy is expressed in kBTU per kilowatt hour, and the LSC, depending on the source, can be either in dollar per kilowatt hour, dollar per therm, or for propane, dollar per unit of propane. All right. Also a summary that is there are two main uses of the energy code metrics. Shouldn't be a surprise for most of you here. But first, the energy code is used to evaluate new measure proposal. It's mainly to evaluate the cost effectiveness and the energy saving of those measures proposed to be included in the energy code. And the metrics are also used as part of the project compliance. It's used to evaluate the trade-off between different building designs. All right, those are the high-level summary. Now I want to get a little bit deeper on the specific components of the LSCs to start with the electric LSC. So the electric LSCs, as I said, is a long-term 30-year life cycle cost of a building measures in terms of dollar per kilowatt hour. What I think most building folks would see in the result is just this hourly value in dollar per kilowatt hour. But in fact, this measure consists of many components. Some of them are impactful in terms of the magnitude of the LCs. Others have more impact on the shape of the LCs. But on a high level, you can think of this, there are two categories of the electric LCs. The first is the marginal cost. I'm showing the chart on the right, which is a hourly average LC components. So the x-axis is the hour of the day, y-axis is the average in dollar per kilowatt hour. Actually, it's in megawatt hour. The marginal costs are all the colorful components. These costs are the costs that would change with electricity use, increase or decrease. You can see the box include many components, but two components I want to highlight here. Those are the two components that have a huge impact on the shape of the electric LC. The first is what we call the generation capacity value, and which is expressed in pink. And the second is the transmission and distribution capacity, or TND, that is represented in orange. So that's the marginal cost. And then moving on to the big gray box underneath, that's what we call the revenue recovery adder. This adder ensures that the total costs that are part of the utility revenue requirements, which are basically all the marginal cost components plus this revenue recovery adder. So in total, these costs should match the average retail rates. So that's one of the purpose of the revenue recovery adder. That's the electric LC. Now, moving on to the natural gas LCs. Natural gas LCs are expressed in monthly values. I'm showing an example here that x-axis is by month, y-axis is by components. Again, many components going on in this LC, but on a high level, you can categorize them to be three big components. The first is the commodity and clean energy cost. That really represents the forecast cost of gas, as that includes both the natural gas and the biofuel going into California. And the transportation and storage, or TNS cost, represents the gas transmission and storage cost. And finally, the gas LC also has a similar component called revenue recovery adder that makes sure in total the gas LCs match average retail rates. All right. One note for the folks here, probably not news for some of you, that is the Assembly Bill 130 was signed and passed in June 2025. What that means is that the 2028 cold cycle metrics would only apply to non-residential building types. So all the residential building types will still follow the 2025 cold cycles. And as a result, all the results that I'm about to show are only for the non-residential customers, because we assume the residential will just be the same. All right. Bottom line up front, this is a snapshot of the main differences between the 2025 cycle and the 2028 cycle. I'm showing the left column is the 2025 cycle for the hourly average electric LC for one example climate zone. Here I'm showing climate zone 9, or Burbank, on the top, monthly natural gas LC on the bottom, and then the right column is the 2028 cycle. The biggest difference is that for both electric and gas LCs, the 2028 cycle show a significant increase in the total magnitude. And then for the electric LCs in particular, the difference between the peak hour and the off-peak hour is also wider. So look at the value at hour 18, and then look at the value at hour 12. That gap is higher for 2028 cycle compared to 2025. And happy to explain more why that was the case curious. All right, so those is a high-level overview of the metrics. Now I'm going to go through very quickly on the key updates of the 2028 cycle. And this mostly is relative to the 2025 cycle, which I understand hasn't come into effect yet. But I guess that's kind of the timeline that we are working with as a metric developer. Here is a very overwhelming slide with all the components that modeling frameworks that go into the development of 2028 electric metrics. You can think of it as 3 columns. That's how I usually organize my thoughts. With inputs on the left, the modeling steps in the middle, and the outputs on the right. I've just described the outputs, which include the long-term system costs, or LSCs, as well as the hourly source energy. In terms of inputs, I think these are more intuitive. The main inputs that we typically gathered and developed for this metric development include the annual load demand by end use. This is typically a CEC demand scenario. The hourly load and renewable shapes. The shapes really impact the hours when the grid is the most constrained, as well as the cost of operating grid. And finally, we also develop retail rate forecasts that go directly into the revenue recovery adder. I won't go into details on the electric system modeling. I'll only spend a little bit of time on the one key piece that we updated. So in terms of the key changes that we made for 2028 cycle compared to 2025, the first is that in the 2028 cycle, we are incorporating or reflecting new weather files, new future weather. This new weather files was developed by another contractor under the CEC. It's essentially a new meteotypicological year weather that reflects future weather based on the latest climate models. What that means is that the 2028 cold cycle will show warmer summer and hotter summer and warmer winter, and that has implications on the results. And the second change we made was we updated the underlying EV shapes. So in the past, we took directly the EV shapes from the IPER, which is a CEC demand forecasting team. And that meant EV shapes essentially followed the existing TUU periods, which has the lowest cost during the middle of the night. So what that means was, in the past, the EV shapes would just be usually peaking at the middle of the night. That may reflect the current TUU periods, but one thing we know is that California will add a lot of solar, renewable, especially solar, in the future. So one could argue that maybe as California included more solar, the TUU periods will evolve as well. So in this, for the 2028 cycle, we developed a new EV shape that essentially moved some of the EV charging to the middle of the day, and that the goal was to provide a more balanced view of the EV charging. And this hourly shape would also have implications of the final hourly electricity LSCs. All right, that is the inputs. And in terms of the electricity modeling, the only thing I want to emphasize is this reliability modeling. So this modeling step identify the hours when the load reduction will be the most valuable. That's why it is relevant to the building code or the metrics. In the past, we only considered those high valuable hours with hours of loss of load or hours with outages. That has been a typical definition of those high load hours. However, one thing that has happened and will keep happening is California is adding a lot of energy storage, which is a flexible resource to the grid and will impact the grid significantly. So for the 2028 cycle, we changed the definition of this critical hours, which is the hours when the load reduction will be the most valuable, to also include hours with storage dispatch. And the idea behind that is because storage is flexible, if we could reduce load in the hours when storage is dispatching, then we could defer some of those storage dispatch to a different hour and therefore avoid outages. So that's kind of the main idea, and again, this has implications of the final results. All right. Now that's a very, very short overview of the modeling framework and the key updates. Next, I'm going to mainly focus on the evolving metrics in the changing grid. So the context of this is that, well, I guess I can go to the next slide. The building code, as you all know, are forecasting, especially the metrics, are forecasting over a 30-year outlook. For 2028's code cycle, we are really talking about the year 2029 to year 2058. This is a very long period, first of all, and this is a period where California's electricity grid will experience very dramatic transformation. And what I mean by that? I would consider the transformation in terms of three buckets. The first is that we see the California grid, well, not just California grid climate, but like the climate of the entire world will likely shift and has already started shifting as of now. And one potential impact is that we will experience hotter summer, milder winter, or even just more volatile weathers. So that will start happening in the next 30 years or so. California grid will also experience very significant changes in energy usage and cost. Two major energy uses will appear. One is the building electrification, the other is vehicle electrification. Both will have very significant impact on the electricity grid and will really impact both the magnitude and the timing of LSCs. And finally, utilities have spending a lot of money, such as costs on the wildfire mitigation, safety, undergrounding cost, and those will have impact on the retail rates. Finally, California's energy infrastructure will change as well. We have our carbon neutrality goal by 2045. We also have certain target for the biomethane inclusion in the gas systems. All of this is to say that because of all of these dramatic changes, the building metrics, well, the change of building metrics, building code metrics, are reflecting some of these changes, even though those changes may seem counterintuitive from current days. And I will make 3 points out how those changes are showing up and why they are different from what we see today. So the point number one is, as California incorporates more renewable and energy storage, the LSC patterns have evolved as well. What I mean by that? So folks might be more familiar with the traditional paradigms where LSCs are typically closely correlated to temperature. And this is because customer load is typically temperature sensitive. And in the traditional paradigm where we had a lot of thermal, such as gas and coal in the system, that system demand directly translate to the cost of operating a power plant. Hence, in the traditional paradigm, usually the more extreme the weather, the higher the system demand and the higher the LSCs. Now, that paradigm has changed. And we're looking at the high renewable penetration. With all the renewable and storage going into the system, the LCs is not only impacted by the high system demand, but also by the lower renewable generation. And as renewable generation is incorporated into the electric system, I would argue that LSC is even more depending on when and how much renewable resource is generating. To further illustrate this point, I want to give a real-life example. Well, first, to differentiate the difference between system demand and the impact of renewable, we typically look at this concept of net load. It basically means the total system demand minus renewable generation. That's it. And the chart I'm showing on the right was a real-time generation dispatch on September 6, 2022. This was a day that CAISO issued a flex alert to request energy conservation. In other words, this was an extremely grid-stressed day where the CAISO was asking everybody to please save energy. And I'm plotting two lines on this hourly dispatch. The black line, which is on top, is called the gross load, or the total system demand, whereas the dash right line is the net load, or the load after we consider renewable generation. And the key takeaway here is that even though on this particular day, the gross demand was peaking at 5 p.m., the net load was actually peaking at 7 p.m., which was precisely the hour when the grid was most constrained and when the LSCs would be the highest. So that's kind of the key takeaway. Now that we are incorporating, or California is incorporating more and more renewable, the LCs, some of the LC components will be more correlating to net load rather than temperature. And to drive that point home, here I'm plotting the energy component of the LCs over the cooling degree days on the left, heating degrees in the middle, and the maximum net load to the right. And this is only for the energy component, not the entire LCs. And you can see here that the marginal energy costs are more correlated to net load rather than temperature. So that's point number one I want to make. As California incorporates more renewable and storage, the LCs will becoming more correlated to net load rather than temperature, or increasingly so. All right. The second point I want to make is regarding the timing of the high LC hours. Here I'm showing the month-hour averages of the critical hours, which again are the hours when load reduction will be the most valuable. And this is from the generation capacity perspective. I'm showing two time points, the 2029 on the left and the 2045 on the right. So looking at 2029, and the darker the color, the more valuable the load reduction would be, or the more stressed the electric grid is. So looking at 2029, the high stress periods still are concentrating in what we call summer net peaking hours. So those are the hours where when the sun is setting, the load is still pretty high, and those are really the stress periods. And I think folks are probably familiar because that's kind of where we are today. But looking at 2045, in the next many years, you see that the high stress period are shifting to the winter time. And that's because during those time, renewable generation, especially solar and wind, is lower compared to the summer. And that in itself has a very big impact on the grid stress periods. And it's also concentrating in the morning time, because that's usually when electricity heating is turning on. So that shift from the summer to winter with observed that pattern many, many times in a variety of modeling frameworks and modeling exercises, and I want to share that as the second takeaway. All right. The third one is in terms of the peakiness of the LSCs. First, to introduce the charts. Here, I'm showing the correlation between the LSCs on the y-axis and the temperature on the x-axis. And I'm showing the values for 2022 on the left, 2025 in the middle, and 2028 on the right. And this all for the same climate zone 9, non-residential also. And note the scale of the y-axis is different for 2022 and 25 and 28. And this in itself is the point I want to make, which is you see that in 2022, some of the LSCs were extremely peaky in the summer. And that's because back then, we were still in a thermal generation-oriented system, and there were only few hours that thermal generation or fossil fuel generations were extremely constrained, and those are the high price hours. But looking at 2025 and 2026, we see that the LCs are becoming flatter, and the key reason behind that is the penetration of storage. I believe as of now, California has probably 12, even 13 gigawatt of energy storage, and will only add more in the future. What that means is because storage is flexible, it can be really dispatched anytime to mitigate loss of load risks. And that's why looking at 2025 and 2028 cycles, we see a flatter LSCs. So those are the three findings I want to share, and again, definitely happy to take questions and discussion. And I totally want to acknowledge that some of those trends may not be what we're seeing right now as of today. But because of that transformative change of California electricity grid, we will start seeing that in the future. All right, last section is result comparison for the 2028 cold cycle with the 2025. I will first talk about the electricity LCs, and then the gas LCs, and finally the source energy. All right, so starting with the winter electricity LCs, I'm showing the 2025 hourly average LC on the left, and then 2028 on the right. I've gave a kind of preview in a few slides before, but the overall takeaway is that compared to the 2025 cold cycle, the magnitude of the electric LCs for 2028 has increased. A few other things to notice is that you see the capacity cost, the generation capacity cost, which is that sliver of red, is more flat compared to the 2025 cycle, and that was mainly because of the change in methodology of the reliability modeling that I described before. Yeah, that's about it. And then moving on to the summer electricity LCs, similar format. Besides the magnitude change, which applies to both winter and summer LSCs, the difference between the peak and off-peak ratio distance is also higher for the 2028 LSCs, and this is mainly to align with the current TOU rates. Right now, the TOU rates we have as of today show such difference between the peak and off-peak hours. Next, moving on to the what we call the duration curves of electricity LC. So what I'm plotting here are we essentially are ranking the electric LCs from the highest to the lowest, and I'm plotting the top 1,000 hours here rather than the 8760 hours in total. And I'm showing the 2025 on the left, 2028 on the right, winter on the top, and summer at the bottom. The two key takeaways here. The first is that you can see the components that are driving the peakiness of LSCs are mainly two components. The first is the generation capacity that is in red, and the second is the T&D capacity that's in orange. For climate zone 9 particularly, the winter peaks are mainly driven by the generation capacity costs, whereas the summer peaks are mainly driven by the T&D costs. But in terms of the peakiness, I would say they are more or less the same between, if we're comparing the highest high to kind of when the tail start to level off. I would say it's probably similar between 2025 and 2028. All right. Moving on to the natural gas LSCs, here I'm showing the monthly averages of LSCs in dollar per therm, 2025 cycle on the left and 2028 cycle on the right. The key change is that the magnitude, again, of the gas LSCs is higher than the 2025. And the reason is similar to what Dr. Fournier showed this morning, that is the death spiral that we're talking about, that are really showing up in the long-term forecast. Essentially what's happening is, as California adopts more electrification, there is reduction in gas throughput, and therefore, but the revenue requirement or the total fixed cost is still more or less the same, and therefore the total dollar is the same, the therm is decreasing, and the average retail rates are increasing. So that's what we are looking at here. That's the pattern showing up in the code metrics. Another thing to emphasize is that the T&S, the transportation and storage cost for gas, is also increasing compared to the 2025 cycle, and that's based on our modeling and also the new data that we got from the utilities. Finally, the electric source energy, the 2020, I'm showing the month-hour averages of the average source energy with 2025 cold cycle on the top, 28 on the bottom. I would say in the grand scheme of things, they are more or less similar. It is very much still, the average source energy reflect both the cost of dispatching a marginal fossil fuel and also reflect the amount of renewable penetration in the electric system. All right. That is a lot of information, but I will recap in one summary slide. The first is what I really want everybody to take away and also to maybe have a discussion with me, more than happy to share kind of our understanding. That is, as California builds more renewable energy and storage, the energy code, especially the electric LSCs, will evolve as well, or will go through pretty big transformation. And particularly, I talk about three things today. The first is that LSCs will becoming more correlated to net load rather than temperature. Well, than temperature is not rather than temperature. The second is that LSCs are also increasing during the winter months when the renewable generation is much lower compared to summer. And finally is LSCs are becoming flatter compared to previous cycles because of that penetration in storage. And in terms of the changes for 2028 cycle compared to 2025, both the electric and gas LSCs are increasing, mainly due to higher revenue recovery adders. For electric LSCs, the clean energy costs also contributed, and then for gas LSCs, T&S cost is a major impact. All right, with that, I will conclude and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, great presentation. In this slide, you said LSCs are becoming flatter, but on slide 13, when you look
They
at
are
it,
about the same. Yeah.
well, it looks 28 was actually peakier. There was a bigger difference between on-peak and off-peak.
Yeah, I should. Yep, definitely there are more nuances than this. So I would say from a duration perspective, they are about the same, but maybe even slightly peakier. But when we're looking at the hourly averages, the LCs are flatter because the generation capacity cost is allocated to more hours than the 2025 cycle. So it's really from a hourly average perspective. But you're right, from a duration perspective, it's about the same.
Can you go back to slides 26 and 27?
26 and 27.
You're on 31 now.
Oh, got it.
So it shows the summer peak is around $700, and the winter is about three. Can you go back to 26? So yeah, actually it went up quite a bit in summertime from $500 to $700. So it does look like with the 28, the peaks are going up. Or am I not reading this
Oh,
correctly?
I see.
Here, can I add something, Fangxing?
Yes,
I
please.
think, sorry, I'm Jared Lansman from E3. I'm Fangxing's colleague. I think what you're seeing is that from the 2022 code cycle, it's getting flatter, it's getting less peaky. 2022 and prior was extremely peaky in the summer.
Yes.
And so when we say it's flatter, we're really talking about even starting with the 2025 code cycle, it's already way flatter. I think what you're seeing here is that it's slightly peakier from 2025 to 2028.
But relative to 2022 is, okay,
Yeah.
it makes sense now. Thank you.
So I have a question regarding AB 130. So you were saying how 2028 is going to stay static pretty much for residential, but not for non-residential. How does hotel motel work into that, since we consider hotel motel non-residential?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question. I don't know if folks in the room have an idea.
I could maybe say something real quick. I am here. Hotel motel and its associated buildings like this one is not considered part of non-residential. It's a group R occupancy under the building code. So that is exempted from on the basis of AB 130.
My concern is if we're saying non-residential is this versus residential is this, how are we going to differentiate that when we're using these LSC numbers in our software?
So the LSCs, and Nikhil sitting next to me, so wave your head yes. For hotel, motel, and residential is going to stay as is for 2025. Got it. So it's done on the software. Yeah. Nod your head yes.
Hi, this is John McHugh. You were showing earlier the costs it looked like by time of day and month. And you were showing, I think, in the near future, in terms of the costs, currently in the morning in August, you have high costs in the morning in August and as well as in the afternoon. Yeah, thank you. And then like you show in 2045, basically the January in the morning in terms of these critical hours. Firstly, in terms of how I sort of visualize and I assume you've done a lot of modeling on this, my expectation is, having lived in a state that had back in the day a bunch of heat pumps, was that there were sort of two peak periods. One was in the morning, so people set back their thermostats, and then the thermostats are reset when people wake up, and there's a peak in the morning. And then there's another peak. Again, people, who are trying to save energy, they turn down their thermostat at night, during the middle of the day, and then they come home. they turn on all their appliances, the street lights come on. You know, so anyway, just one, I'm kind of surprised that the length of the critical hours are so long. I would think that they're actually a tighter amount. The other thing is for 2029, tell me if I got this wrong, but my expectation is that currently that utility rates actually have low rates. They're encouraging people to charge from midnight to early in the morning. Am I misunderstanding sort of where we're at? If that was the case, shouldn't there be a tariff signal that actually discourages people from charging their vehicles in the middle of the night? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. To answer the first one, you are totally right from a total system perspective that intuition is correct. This chart, I would say, is showing both the impact of system demand and the resource supply. And when we take consideration of resource supply, which includes abundant renewable and abundant of storage, I think that's the translates that peakiness of this picture that we are seeing here. For example, imagine using your example of like people would turn off their heat pump at 5 a.m., for example, and then suddenly we see a peak in system demand, and in the past, with no storage, that will be the hour where we see very high price. But with storage would naturally beat, like start to dispatch in that hour and drive down prices. And I think that's a similar dynamic in the generation capacity as well, whereas the storage could come in and essentially level out those high price hours. And I would say that's the big impact of high storage penetration in the electric grid. And that's also part of the reason that we see these long hours. And that's because we have so much storage that they can really cover a lot of hours. But because they can do that, even though they can do that, there are still hours that we could experience outages or loss of load, and those are the very high-risk hours. For the second point on the EV charging TOU signal and the current critical hours, I think the current TOU period is incentivizing EV charging at midnight, and we certainly, I have a lot of thoughts on to what extent that is reasonable and that is aligned with current price signals. I think there are a lot of evidences that they don't necessarily align, and I think that really speaks up to the lagging between the grid condition and the redesign piece. Good? All right, thank you.
Thank you. So can you explain, because I noticed that there are two major changes that happened, right? You went with a new weather file, and you also added the EV. So I wonder, what is the peer-reviewed research on that? Like, because definitely what I see is that we have a higher peak when after you changed the weather file. For after 5 p.m. when you were, I think, comparing 2025 to 2028. So could it be that because the weather file has changed, and also what is the resource for the EV profile shape? Did you consider that people are gonna buy more EV? And did you, because this LSC, the whole reason is to predict, right? You're showing saving for 30 years. So what are your assumptions on, whether, do you change the weather file each year? When you did that analysis of LSC, did you change the EV profile for 30 years? When you did that, did you consider new process loads when you were calculating the LSC? Yeah? So these are my questions. Thank you.
Sure. I think I understand the EV question better, so I'll address that first. I'm not sure if I fully follow the weather profile. So you're trying to understand how we got to the EV shapes and whether we consider that changing of shapes over the years. So I would say when developing the EV, hourly EV demand, there are two components. First is the annual EV demand. So like how much of EV we expect in terms of from an annual basis for the next 30 years. And that is based on a specific CEC demand scenario. So there's a scenario that assumes certain amount of EV shape and EV demand, not shape, and to align with that, that's kind of our assumption. In terms of the shape, I would say our approach was to first maintain some alignment with the IPER EV shape, because that is the EV shape that is behind a lot of research planning in California. But we also recognize that, the current EV shape peaks at midnight. And with so much renewable online, we anticipate there might be some shift into that EV shape. And in this case, our forecast or our anticipation is that there will be more EV charging in the middle of the day. We did design the shape such that there is a gradual transition. So it's not like middle of the night today and then midnight next day. It's more kind of from certain point, we gradually incorporate that middle of the day EV charging. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about the weather profile.
Did you, for the EV charge, did you consider that each year you are going to have more EV adding to the system?
Yes.
Yeah, so the other two was the weather file. We usually go with the EPW weather file, but I don't know that California has its own weather file, but you are saying that you guys changed it to a new weather file. What happened here? I wonder what was that? Can you explain on the new weather file where you guys got that information? And just in general, I think that we are gonna get more process load considering, the AI load, right? So what do you guys see in future for the process load?
For sure. Do we have time or should I don't want to get to the next, but that's a great question. I think we should talk more as a discussion. All right, thank you.
Thanks you guys so much for all the insightful questions and back and forth. It's really valuable. Can't plan that, trust me, I've tried.